The Dark Mirror, a tale of sacrifice and shadows. A young girl named Emily had just moved to a small village at the edge of a dark forest. She was only 12 years old, and it was her first time living far from the city. Her family had moved to a small house on the outskirts of the village because her parents wanted a quieter life. The house was old, with creaky floors and dark wooden beams in the ceiling. Emily didn't mind it, though. It felt cozy, even if a little spooky at night. She liked the sound of the wind rustling through the trees, and she loved to look at the stars from her bedroom window. One afternoon, Emily decided to explore the area around her new house. She wandered through the tall grass behind the garden, stepping carefully over rocks and fallen branches. The air was cool, and she could smell the fresh earth. She liked being outside. As she walked farther away from the house, she noticed something strange. There, hidden behind thick bushes, was an old wooden door. It didn't belong there. It looked like part of a small shed or barn that had been forgotten long ago. The door was cracked and peeling, its paint faded and chipped. Emily's heart beat a little faster. She had never seen this door before, and she couldn't understand why her parents hadn't told her about it. Curious, Emily stepped closer. The door creaked as she gently pushed it open. Inside, the air was cold and damp. She felt a chill run down her spine, but her curiosity was too strong to turn back. She stepped inside the dark space. It smelled musty, like old books and dust. At the far end of the room was an object that caught her eye. It was a mirror, framed with dark wood and carved with strange symbols that looked like they had been scratched into the frame by hand. The mirror was tall, taller than Emily, and its surface was perfectly smooth, like a sheet of glass. But when Emily looked into it, she didn't see her own reflection. Instead, she saw something else, something different, something wrong. The mirror showed an image of a dark, foggy forest. The trees were tall and twisted, and there was a shadow moving between them. Emily stared, her breath catching in her throat. The shadow looked like a person, but it was not quite a person. It moved slowly, always staying just out of reach of the trees. Emily blinked, but the shadow did not go away. She didn't know why, but she reached out to touch the mirror. As her fingers brushed the cold surface, a shock ran through her hand. She quickly pulled away, but it was too late. The world around her seemed to shift. The air became thick, and the room began to feel as if it were closing in around her. The sound of her heart pounding was the only thing she could hear. Suddenly, the mirror's surface rippled like water. Emily gasped and stepped back. She didn't know what to do. The mirror wasn't just a reflection. It was a door, a doorway to something else, something dark. Emily stood still for a moment, staring at the mirror. Her heart raced, and her breath came fast. She felt afraid, but she couldn't look away. The shadow in the mirror seemed to move closer, its outline becoming clearer. It was like someone was standing just beyond the trees, waiting for her. Suddenly, Emily heard a voice. It was faint at first, like a whisper, but it grew louder. "Don't touch it," she froze. The voice was not from the room, but from somewhere far away. It sounded like a warning. Emily turned quickly, searching the room, but there was no one there. She was alone. Her hands trembled as she reached for the mirror again, ignoring the warning voice in her mind. Why shouldn't she touch it? The shadow in the mirror was so strange, so fascinating. Emily could feel herself drawn to it, like something was pulling her in. Please don't touch it, Emily." The voice spoke again, but this time it was clearer. It was a woman's voice. Emily didn't recognize it, but it felt so real, so urgent. She turned her head to the side, looking for the source. But the room remained empty. Only the mirror seemed alive, the shadow in it still moving closer. But Emily couldn't stop herself. The temptation was too strong. She reached out again. Her fingers brushed the cool glass, and for a moment, everything went silent. Then, the surface of the mirror rippled again, just like before. But this time, it felt different. It felt like the mirror was pulling at her, like something inside the glass wanted to take her. Emily gasped and stepped back, but her feet wouldn't move. She felt her body being drawn toward the mirror, like invisible hands were reaching out to grab her. Before she knew it, Emily's whole body was standing in front of the mirror. The shadow in the glass was now right up against the edge, just a step away from her. It was not a person anymore. It was more like a dark shape, a black mass, and it felt cold, like ice. "Stop, Emily," the voice screamed one last time, but it was too late. Emily reached out with both hands and touched the glass. She felt a sharp, icy cold spread up her arms, making her shiver. The world around her seemed to disappear. She couldn't see anything except the black, swirling mass in the mirror. Suddenly, the cold sensation became painful, and Emily tried to pull away. But the mirror wouldn't let go. The more she struggled, the harder the mirror's grip became. The dark shadow reached out of the glass, its shape growing larger and darker, wrapping around her. With a scream, Emily tried to break free, but it was no use. The shadow was stronger than she was. Slowly, it began to pull her into the mirror. Her feet left the ground, and the world around her twisted and blurred. "No, let me go," Emily cried out, but the shadow didn't listen. She felt herself being dragged into the cold, black space. The room around her disappeared completely, and everything went dark. Emily felt the coldness wrap around her. She tried to scream, but no sound came out. The shadow pulled her further into the mirror, and everything around her spun faster and faster. She felt dizzy and scared, her body twisting as if it were being pulled into a different world. Then, suddenly, everything stopped. The world went silent. Emily opened her eyes. She was no longer in the small room with the dusty mirror. She wasn't even in the house anymore. She was standing in the middle of a dark, thick forest. The trees around her were tall and twisted, their branches reaching out like gnarled hands. The ground was cold and damp, and the air felt heavy, like it was filled with something dangerous. Emily's heart raced. She turned around, trying to find the door, but there was nothing. The door, the house, the village, it was all gone. She was alone in this dark forest, and she had no idea how to get back. The shadow from the mirror was still with her. She could feel its presence, even though it wasn't visible anymore. It was like a weight on her chest, making it hard to breathe, and then she heard something. A low whisper in the air. It was the same voice from before. The voice that had warned her. "What have you done?" the voice said. It sounded sad and angry at the same time. "You've opened the door." Emily's stomach twisted. She didn't know what the voice meant. All she knew was that she had touched the mirror, and now everything was wrong. She started walking through the forest, hoping to find a way out, but the deeper she went, the darker it became. The trees seemed to close in on her, and the air grew colder. The whispering voice continued to follow her, but now it wasn't just one voice. There were many voices, all speaking at once, crying, begging, laughing. They sounded far away, but they filled the air like a storm. "You let us out," a voice whispered. "You opened the way," another voice said. Emily's heart pounded in her chest. She didn't know what was happening, but she could feel the forest around her, becoming alive with something dark and evil. She had opened something, but she didn't understand what it was. She just knew that whatever it was now free, and it was angry. Suddenly, the ground beneath her feet shook. The trees trembled, their branches cracking and groaning. A loud rumble filled the air, and the ground split open in front of her. Out of the crack, a black mist started to rise. It was thick and oily like smoke, and it spread quickly. The forest seemed to be changing. The trees twisted and bent, their leaves turning a sickly shade of black. The sky above darkened, and the air grew heavy, thick with the smell of decay. "It's too late," the voice said again. "You've let them out." Emily tried to run, but the mist was everywhere. It moved fast, wrapping around her legs, pulling her down. She screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the thick, dark air. The mist seemed to take shape, growing into shadows, creatures made of darkness. They moved towards her, their eyes glowing red, and they hissed as they got closer. Emily turned to run, but the mist was everywhere, swirling around her, pulling at her. She stumbled, tripping over the roots of the trees, and fell to the ground. She couldn't escape. The creatures in the mist were too many. They surrounded her, their glowing red eyes burning into her. Then the voices began to laugh. It wasn't a happy laugh, it was a cruel laugh, a laugh full of hate. Emily felt the weight of their anger, the weight of everything she had unleashed. She had opened the door, and now the creatures from the dark world were free. They were coming for her. Emily couldn't breathe. The dark creatures surrounded her, their red eyes glowing in the thick black mist. She could feel the coldness in her bones, a deep chill that made her shiver. The air was so heavy it felt like it was pushing her down. The shadows seemed to grow larger and stronger around her. They hissed, their voices like 1,000 whispers in her ears, their red eyes glowing in the thick black mist. She could feel the coldness in her bones, a deep chill that made her shiver. The air was so heavy, it felt like it was pushing her down. The shadows seemed to grow larger and stronger around her. They hissed, their voices like 1,000 whispers in her ears. "You opened the way. Now we are free." The creatures' voices were all around her, echoing in her mind. Emily closed her eyes, trying to block out the sounds, but the darkness was everywhere. She tried to scream, but no sound came out. Her chest felt tight, like something was squeezing her heart. Then, something strange happened. The darkness that had filled the forest started to spread. It wasn't just around Emily anymore. The mist moved faster, creeping across the forest like it was alive. It didn't stop at the trees. It spread outwards, into the village, into the houses, into the streets. Back in the village, Emily's parents were in their home, making dinner. They didn't know what was happening. They didn't feel the coldness or see the mist that was creeping into their home. But they began to feel something. It was a heavy feeling, like a weight on their shoulders. The air in the house became thick and suffocating. The walls seemed to move and bend, and the lights flickered. Outside, the village was changing. The trees near the village square twisted like they were alive. The wind started to howl, a loud, angry sound that made the windows rattle. The once peaceful village was being swallowed by the same black mist that Emily had seen in the forest. The streets, the houses, even the people, seemed to be slowly disappearing under the weight of the darkness. Emily's parents stepped outside, confused and scared. They looked around, seeing the mist moving closer, filling the air with a cold, wet fog. They couldn't understand what was happening. They called Emily's name, but there was no answer. At the same time, in the village square, people were beginning to act strange. Some of them started to panic, running around in fear, screaming. Others stood still, staring at nothing, their eyes empty and blank. The darkness was affecting them, changing them. It was like the evil that Emily had released was taking control of everything, turning the peaceful village into something terrible. The shadows in the forest were not just creatures, they were a force that spread across everything it touched. It moved through the air like a sickness, infecting the land, the people, and even the animals. The dogs and cats began to run through the streets, barking and meowing in fear, their eyes wide with terror. Emily was still trapped in the dark forest, surrounded by the mist and the creatures. She could feel the world around her changing. She could feel the evil spreading, and she knew it was all because of her. She had opened the mirror, and now everything was falling apart. She tried to move, but the mist was everywhere. The creatures were closing in on her, their red eyes glowing brighter. She couldn't escape. She couldn't run. She had let the evil out, and now it was too late. But then she remembered the voice that had warned her. It was still there, deep inside her mind. "You can stop this." The voice wasn't angry anymore. It was calm, like a soft whisper. Emily looked around, searching for the source of the voice, but there was no one there. "You can stop it, Emily. You have the power to stop this." Emily felt a spark of hope. Maybe she could stop it. Maybe she could fix the mistake she had made. But how? The creatures were closing in on her, their cold hands reaching out. Emily had to act fast. Suddenly, she remembered something. The mirror. The mirror was the key. It wasn't just a way into the dark world. It was also a way to stop the darkness from spreading. But how could she get back to the mirror? How could she return to the place where it all began? She turned, her heart racing. She had to find a way. The mist was spreading fast, and soon the whole village would be covered. The forest, the people, even her family would be lost to the darkness. Emily's heart was pounding in her chest as the mist pressed in around her. The creatures, shadows made of darkness, were moving closer. Their glowing red eyes seemed to burn through the black fog, and Emily could feel their cold presence wrapping around her, suffocating her. She turned, her mind racing. She had to get out of here. She had to survive. The voices were everywhere now, low whispers, angry shouts, and sad cries. They filled her ears, making it hard to think. She could feel the ground beneath her feet shaking, the trees around her groaning and twisting, like the forest itself was alive with fear. "Help me," Emily whispered to herself. But she knew no one could hear her. The village, her family, everything was far away, swallowed by the darkness that was spreading faster than she could run. She looked around, searching for a way out. The creatures were getting closer. Their cold hands reached out of the mist, trying to grab her, but Emily jumped back. She didn't have much time. The voices in the air were becoming louder, more chaotic. It felt like the world itself was falling apart, turning into something evil and twisted. Suddenly, Emily remembered the voice, the one that had warned her. She felt it again, deep inside her mind, like a whisper in the dark. "You have to go back to the mirror." The words echoed in her mind, clear and calm. The mirror, the place where it all started. The only thing that could stop the darkness. Emily didn't know how, but she knew she had to get there. She ran, pushing through the thick mist. The creatures were chasing her, their claws scraping the ground as they moved faster, their hisses filling the air. Emily's legs felt heavy. But she didn't stop, she couldn't. The fog around her grew thicker, colder. The trees seemed to move, their branches reaching out to grab her. But she kept running. She had no choice. As she ran, the mist seemed to get darker and darker. The forest was now full of shadows, twisted shapes that seemed to watch her, waiting for her to fall. She could hear the hissing sound of the creatures behind her, getting closer. They were too fast, too many. Emily stumbled and fell to the ground, her knees scraped against the rough earth. She could feel the cold hands of the creatures almost touch her, but with a burst of strength, she pushed herself up and kept running. Her breath was quick, her body shaking with fear. But she couldn't give up. She couldn't let the darkness win. The forest was starting to blur, and Emily wasn't sure where she was anymore. The trees all looked the same, the shadows growing longer and darker with every step she took. She felt lost, hopeless. The creatures were closing in, and Emily's heart sank. Then, through the fog, she saw something. A light. It was faint, but it was there. A soft, glowing light just ahead. Emily's heart skipped a beat. The mirror, she had to reach it. She had to make it to the light before the darkness swallowed her whole. With all the strength she had left, Emily ran towards the light. The creatures were right behind her now, their claws scratching the ground, their glowing eyes burning in the mist. Emily's legs were tired, her body aching, but she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. The light grew brighter. Emily pushed through the thick fog, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She was almost there, but the creatures were still chasing her. One of them reached out and grabbed her ankle, pulling her to the ground. Emily screamed, but it was muffled by the sound of the hissing creatures all around her. Her heart raced as the creature pulled her closer. She kicked and fought, trying to break free, but the creature's grip was strong. Its cold claws dug into her skin, making her skin burn with ice. No, she couldn't let this happen. With everything she had left, Emily pushed herself up. She kicked the creature away, her foot landing on its dark, shadowy arm. It screeched, but Emily didn't wait. She ran again, ignoring the pain in her legs, the cold burning her skin. The mirror was close now. It was so close. Finally, Emily reached the glowing light. The mirror stood before her, just as she had seen it before, the dark wood and strange symbols carved into the frame. Emily didn't hesitate. She reached out, her hands shaking, and touched the surface. At first, nothing happened. The mirror was cold as ice. But then, slowly, the surface of the mirror began to ripple. The darkness around Emily seemed to pull back, just a little. The creatures shrieked, but they couldn't reach her now. The mirror was a barrier, a shield against the evil that she had set free. Emily took a deep breath and stepped forward, her hands still on the mirror. The shadows around her were pushing against the light, but they couldn't get through. She closed her eyes, praying that the mirror would hold, that it would take her back home. Suddenly, everything went still. The hissing stopped. The air grew quiet, as if the whole world was holding its breath. When Emily opened her eyes, the forest was gone. The creatures were gone. She was standing back in the small room with the mirror. The mist had disappeared, and the air was calm again. But Emily knew it wasn't over. The darkness was still out there, waiting. It had not been fully sealed. The mirror was still open, and the evil was still alive. But for now, Emily had survived. And that was all she could do. She had to find a way to stop it for good. Emily stood in front of the mirror, her breath coming fast. The cold air in the room felt like ice. But it was nothing compared to the cold that had surrounded her in the dark forest. She looked around, her heart still racing, her mind spinning. Everything was quiet now, but she knew the danger wasn't over. The mirror in front of her looked just like it had before. The dark wood, the strange symbols. But it felt different now, like something had changed. The shadow she had seen in it earlier, the evil force was still inside, waiting. It hadn't been sealed away completely. Emily thought about the voices she had heard. The voices had told her she could stop the darkness, that she had the power to fix what she had done. But how? How could she stop something so evil, something that had already spread so far? She glanced back at the door, thinking about the village, her family. The villagers, everyone was still in danger. The evil was spreading fast, and Emily had no idea how to stop it. She felt hopeless. But then she remembered something, the voice that had whispered to her in the forest. It wasn't just any voice. It had been calm, not like the evil creatures. It had said she could fix this. Maybe she could still do something. There had to be a way. Emily stepped closer to the mirror. She reached out and touched the cold glass again. Feeling the chill run through her fingers, her hands were shaking, but she gripped the mirror firmly. "Please, help me," Emily whispered to herself. The mirror seemed to hum, a low, soft sound. Suddenly, the strange symbols on the frame began to glow faintly. Emily's heart skipped a beat. The mirror was reacting, responding to her touch. She wasn't sure what was happening, but she felt a small spark of hope. Maybe this was the chance she had been waiting for. The voice came again, clearer this time. "You can stop it. You must find the heart of the darkness." Emily nodded, though she didn't fully understand. The heart of the darkness, what did that mean? She looked at the mirror again, trying to focus. The surface rippled like water. And for a moment, the blackness inside it seemed to move, swirling in front of her. Suddenly, the mirror began to show her something, not just a reflection, but an image. It was a vision, a dark and twisted version of the village, covered in mist. The trees were bent, the streets empty, and the houses broken. And in the center of it all, there was a dark spot like a hole in the earth, glowing red. "That is the heart," the voice said again. "Go there, destroy it. The darkness will die." Emily's heart raced. That was it. The heart of the darkness, the source of all the evil. If she could destroy it, the darkness would vanish. But it wouldn't be easy. It was in the middle of the village, and she wasn't sure how she could get there. The creatures were still out there, and the mist was thick. The village was far from here, and time was running out, but this was her only chance. She knew she had to go. Emily closed her eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. She had to be brave. She had to fix the mistake she made. She had to stop the evil from spreading any further. She turned away from the mirror and walked to the door of the room. She wasn't alone. The voice was still with her, guiding her, even though she couldn't see it. She could feel it, and that gave her the courage to keep going. Emily stepped out of the room and into the cold night. The air was heavy, and the mist still hung thick around the village. It felt like the world was holding its breath. The village, once so familiar, now looked like a strange, dangerous place. The streets were empty, the houses dark and silent. The trees on the edges of the village were bent and twisted, their branches reaching out like hands trying to grab her. Emily had no time to waste. The heart of the darkness was waiting. She knew she had to go to it. She had to destroy it. But deep inside, she felt scared. What if she couldn't do it? What if the darkness was too strong? What if she failed? But she didn't have a choice. The village, her family, everyone she knew, they were all in danger. The evil was spreading fast, and only she could stop it. She had opened the mirror. She had let the darkness out. Now she had to fix it. She had to make a choice. Emily took a deep breath. She walked through the village, the mist thick around her, the air colder with every step. The creatures from the forest were still out there. hidden in the shadows, but they didn't come after her. They seemed to know she was on a mission, or maybe they were just waiting for her to fail. The glowing red spot in the middle of the village wasn't far now. She could feel it, pulling her toward it like a force she couldn't resist. She followed the path, her steps steady but her heart racing. This was it. She reached the center of the village. The mist was so thick now she could barely see, but there, in front of her, was the dark spot she had seen in the mirror. It was like a black hole, glowing red in the middle, swirling with evil. The air around it was heavy, thick with the weight of all the darkness that had spread through the village. Emily stood frozen for a moment, staring at the red glow. It was like the heart of the evil, beating with a rhythm of its own. She could feel the power of it, pulling at her, trying to stop her from doing what she had to do. She stepped forward. Her body felt cold, but she knew she couldn't turn back now. She had come this far. She had to destroy it. But how? The voice in her mind spoke again. You must destroy it, Emily. Only then will the darkness die. But something else came with the voice, something darker. The red glow in the middle of the village began to pulse. It grew stronger, brighter, and a deep, low sound echoed in the air. The creatures of the darkness began to appear, their red eyes glowing, their forms twisted and terrible. They were gathering around the heart of the evil, watching her, waiting. Emily's heart thudded in her chest. She could see the creatures, their cold eyes locked on her, but she had no choice. She couldn't stop now. The decision was hers. The mirror, the creatures, the evil, it all came down to this moment. She had to choose. Fight back and destroy the heart of the darkness, or give up and let everything be swallowed by the evil. She closed her eyes for a moment. She couldn't let the darkness win. She had already made one mistake. She couldn't make another. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for everyone, for her family, for the village, for all the people who were lost to the shadows. With a deep breath, Emily stepped forward, her hands shaking, but her resolve strong. She would fight. She would destroy the heart of the darkness, no matter what it took. The creatures hissed and began to move toward her, but Emily raised her hands, focusing all her energy on the dark, glowing spot. She wasn't sure how she would do it, but the voice had told her to destroy it, so she would. The red glow seemed to reach out for her, trying to stop her, but Emily fought against it. She couldn't stop now. She had made her decision. With a final cry, Emily reached out and touched the heart of the darkness. When Emily touched the red glowing heart of the darkness, she felt the coldness rush through her body. It was like ice, sharp and deep. The evil that had spread across the village seemed to grow stronger as she touched it, pulling at her, trying to swallow her whole. The creatures hissed loudly, their glowing eyes bright in the mist. They circled around her, getting closer and closer. Emily could feel their cold, ghostly hands reaching for her, trying to pull her into the darkness. But Emily didn't move. She stood still, her hand pressed against the heart of the darkness. Even though every part of her body screamed in pain, she had to do this. She had to stop it. The voice spoke again, but this time it wasn't calm or quiet. It was urgent. You must give yourself to the heart. Only then can the evil be stopped. Emily's heart stopped. Give herself, what did that mean? She looked down at her hand, still pressing against the glowing spot. The evil was swirling around her, trying to pull her in. She knew the voice was telling her the truth. If she didn't make this sacrifice, everything would be lost. She thought about her family, her friends, the villagers. They were all in danger. The darkness had taken so much from them already, and if she didn't act, it would destroy everything. The voice had told her that only by giving herself to the heart of the darkness could she destroy it, but it meant something terrible. It meant she would have to give up her life. Tears filled Emily's eyes. She had come so far, fought so hard, but in the end it wasn't about her. It was about saving everyone else. She had no choice. Emily closed her eyes. She could hear the hissing creatures getting closer. The darkness was closing in, but she knew what she had to do. She took a deep breath, and in a final act of courage, she whispered, "I'm ready." And then she gave herself to the heart. The moment Emily's body touched the glowing red heart, the world around her exploded in a rush of light. The creatures screamed, their bodies twisting and disappearing into the darkness. The evil forces, the mist, the shadows, all of it started to fade. The pain in Emily's body was unbearable. It felt like the life was being pulled from her, like everything inside her was being torn apart, but through it all, she kept her eyes closed. Holding on to the hope that what she was doing would work, she had to stop the darkness. Then, everything went still, the pain stopped, the hissing creatures were gone. The red glow began to fade away, and the mist in the village slowly started to clear. Emily opened her eyes. The darkness was gone. She was standing alone in the middle of the village. The trees were no longer twisted. The streets were no longer empty. The village was quiet, peaceful once again. Emily opened her eyes. The darkness was gone. But Emily didn't feel like herself anymore. She felt weak, her body fading, like she was drifting away. She looked down at her hands. They were fading, disappearing into thin air. She had given everything. She smiled softly, knowing that the darkness was gone, and the village was safe, but she could feel herself slipping away. Before she completely vanished, she whispered, "I did it." Her voice was soft, barely a whisper, but she was at peace. When the villagers finally came out of their houses, they saw the village was calm. The mist was gone. The sun began to rise in the sky, shining on the village like it had before the darkness came. The trees were standing tall, and the houses were safe again. The creatures, the evil, they were all gone, but there was no sign of Emily. The villagers searched everywhere, calling her name, but they could not find her. Some believed she had disappeared into the mist forever. Others said she had become part of the light that had defeated the darkness. No one could explain it, but the village was peaceful again, and the evil was gone. And though they never saw Emily again, they all remembered her. Was the darkness truly gone, or had Emily just become part of it, her sacrifice never truly enough? No one knew for sure, but they all knew one thing: Emily had saved them. After Emily disappeared, the village was silent. The streets were calm, and the mist that had covered the town was gone. The trees stood tall, and the houses were no longer broken. It was as if the darkness had never touched them. But Emily was gone. No one knew where she had gone or why she had disappeared. The villagers searched the village, looking for any sign of her. They called her name, but there was no answer. Some said they could feel her presence, as if she had become part of the village, part of the light that had driven the darkness away. Others believed that Emily had vanished forever, her sacrifice, leaving only the peace she had fought for. The villagers remembered Emily. They remembered how she had fought to stop the evil, how she had faced the darkness with courage and strength. They talked about her often, and the story of her bravery passed from one generation to the next. But even as time went on, one question remained: was the darkness truly gone? Days passed, and the village seemed peaceful. But sometimes, when the sun set and the shadows grew long, people would hear strange whispers in the wind. Some said it was the wind itself. Others said it was the voices of the lost souls Emily had saved. But some of the older villagers started to worry. What if the darkness is not truly gone? One old man asked, what if Emily's sacrifice was not enough? Some nights, the villagers would hear strange noises, low growling sounds that came from the woods. The trees would sway even when there was no wind. The air would feel colder than usual, like something was watching them. And sometimes people would have strange dreams. Dreams of dark, twisted shapes and red glowing eyes. But every time they woke up, the sun was shining, and the village seemed peaceful again. Was it just their imagination? Or was the darkness still out there, waiting for its chance to return? The villagers never knew for sure. Many years passed, and life in the village went back to normal. But every so often, someone would stand in the quiet streets, looking around, wondering, was Emily's sacrifice enough to stop the evil? Or was the darkness still out there, hiding, waiting to return one day? The answer, it seemed, was unknown. One day, many years later, a young girl named Lily moved into the village. She was curious and loved to explore. One evening, as the sun was setting and the sky was turning dark, she walked toward the old house where Emily had once lived. As Lily passed by the house, she noticed something strange: the old mirror that had been in the house. The one Emily had touched when she faced the darkness was still there. It wasn't glowing anymore, but it looked strange, as if it was waiting for something. Lily didn't know why, but something inside her told her to be careful. Lily took a deep breath and stepped closer to the mirror. She reached out, touching the cold surface. The moment her fingers touched the glass, the mirror rippled. Just like it had before, the red glow slowly began to come back, faint at first, then growing stronger. Lily pulled her hand back quickly, feeling a chill run down her spine. The darkness was not gone. For a moment, she thought she saw something in the mirror. Something moving. It looked like a shadow. A figure with glowing eyes. Was it Emily, or was it something else, something darker, waiting to come back? Lily didn't know, but she knew one thing. The darkness was not gone. It was still there, hidden, waiting. And so the mystery remained. The evil that Emily had fought so hard to stop was still out there. Maybe it had been sealed away for now, but one day it might come back. No one could say for sure. The villagers would never know if Emily's sacrifice had truly destroyed the darkness, but they would always remember her, the girl who had given everything to save them, and the darkness that she had fought with all her heart. And somewhere, deep in the village, the old mirror waited. In the final part of the story, the enigma remains. The villagers are left wondering if the darkness has truly been defeated, while the village seems peaceful. Strange signs hint that the evil may still be out there, hiding, waiting for the right moment to return. The story ends with a lingering sense of uncertainty. Will the darkness ever return, or was it stopped for good? The mystery of Emily's sacrifice remains unresolved, leaving the reader with the same question that haunted the villagers. Is evil truly gone?